When I was a little kid, I wanted to be on the tugboats like my dad. I think most, sons are like that. But as I got older, I was thinking about maybe I'd like to be a police officer, an RCMP officer. And then along the way, I started listening to the radio. In my last year of high school, I took a broadcasting course, the Columbia School of Broadcasting, to learn how to be an announcer. And a guy that I went to high school with was working on the rock station in Regina. And he said, "Hey, Greg, there's an opening at the country station." I thought, country? Well, I like Johnny Cash and a few other country artists. So I got this job and I went to Regina and spent a year there as the all-night disc jockey. And then I got, I think, one of the big breaks in my broadcasting career. I was like 22 years old and I got a job in Medicine Hat, Alberta. And I was given the opportunity to be on television. No teleprompters back then. You had to memorize almost 15 minutes of sports. I became more and more comfortable. Then they had me reading the news as well and doing weather. And so after being there for a year and gaining confidence, I sent off some audition tapes and I was hired by a station in Vancouver. Here I was in my hometown, and it was during that time that I was just kind of on top of the world. And I think in some ways it was where I really had a crisis. I don't know if I call it crisis of faith or a life crisis, when a guy that I went to high school with, a year younger, was killed in a car accident. And that led to some discussion with my dad, what happens when you die? And, do we just die and that's it? But it was during that time that I really started to search. And it was, so I ended up going to Edmonton, working as a broadcaster in Edmonton, sportscaster, reporter, and anchor.
Actually announcing today that they have given the Oilers another 560 tickets to go for draft day on Saturday.
And then there's this young lady that I had met down in Medicine Hat named Arlene. We dated a little bit in Medicine Hat. She went to Edmonton, I went to Vancouver. We reconnected in Edmonton, and she had a church background. So we started to go to church and eventually ended up in a little Baptist church in West Edmonton. And after being there for several months, I gave my life to the Lord Jesus.
When he met Jesus, it changed his entire life. It just turned him right around. So that has been a huge influence for me, and it's been a ride walking with him. I mean, I was raised in a Christian home, but was fairly complacent, and I feel like in walking with Greg, the complacency was gone. I just saw a man who was pursuing Jesus with his whole heart, and it convicted me.
We were married, Arlene and I, and we had 2 young kids, Matt and Sarah. And I felt this call to Bible school. So my idea at that time was that I started to watch this program called 100 Huntley Street. And a guy named David Maines was on there, and Father Bob McDougall. And so here I'm a new Christian, I'm watching this program, and I'm thinking, I would like to do that. I love broadcasting, and I'm now a Christian, and I would like to take my broadcasting skills and put it together. So I ended up going to Bible school, graduated after 3 years. During that time, started to do some pastoral ministry, and eventually we would go on to Winnipeg, work for a ministry there called It's a New Day.
Because I've met many people that are just passionate Christians that used to hate Christians. He said, a racehorse can run fast in either direction.
And it was while I was at It's a New Day that TSN invited me to come on and be the reporter.
10 years ago, he was the bench boss with the New York Slapshots of the now defunct Atlantic Coast League.
It was like the Lord gave me this opportunity to kind of fulfill, maybe a dream or a goal, to work on a national network like TSN. It was a very great time in Winnipeg. I was doing some radio programs, a show called God Talk on a secular radio station. We planted a church, and then it was at that time that I got involved with the Voice of the Martyrs.
195 Christian families, that's 825 people.
I mean, there's so many great people that I've met, heroes of the faith with the Voice of the Martyrs, although they say they're not heroes, they're just living their life for Jesus. But one of those was a lady named Lalani. Her husband had, become an evangelical Christian. He had been a Buddhist monk. And they were just seeing great things happening in the interior part of Sri Lanka. And she told the story of one night they're coming home from, meeting with some of the people in their church, and they're going, God is just doing amazing things, and we're so excited about it. They got home, there was a knock on the door. Lionel went to answer the door. As he opened it, he was shot. He was running, they were stabbing him. He was He ran through the house, he went into the bedroom, and they continued to stab him, and he would die. He was taken to the hospital, but it was clear that he was gone. And Lalani said she put her hand on his cold body and said, Jesus, you have called us here. I will continue this ministry. Later on, she went home. She took her little son, Shamgar, into her arms, put him on her leg, and said, the Lord giveth, looks at her little son. The Lord taketh, you've taken my husband home, Jesus. But blessed be the name of the Lord. She started 5 churches. She had this large church there in Sri Lanka. She is one of the leaders in the church, not just among women, but among the believers in Sri Lanka. She's an amazing lady. She just loves the people there. And even those that, killed her husband, because that's one of the first things she said. She looked up to heaven, I forgive those that have done this to me and have taken my husband from me. To be honest, it has been difficult. I've had to, seek out some counseling because you're hearing stories of death and destruction, of rape and murder, villages being burned, and you're meeting the people that have had to endure this. So emotionally, it's been extremely hard at times. On the other side, it's incredibly built up my faith. People that are willing to die for the gospel, and stories of, like, hey, we went through this, we're suffering, but we are not quitting. We're going to keep on going. One of the things when you work with the Persecuted Church, it's very intense. And that's where my life has been. And I still continue to tell those stories. And I mean, the reason I ended up I guess as one of the hosts of 100 Huntley Street is because I was a constant guest on here and came from a broadcasting background, and I was surprised to given this great opportunity, and I'm so thankful for it. And we get to talk about the Persecuted Church and share their stories to a national audience, and then to work in a great ministry again of a guy that left a great legacy for us, in David Maines, and so to have the opportunity to share those stories, hear testimonies. And the people, the friendships I've made, and the connections, and we're all working in this together. We have one goal, and that's glorifying Jesus through a testimony of somebody that we're sharing on Huntley Street, or somebody that's suffering for the gospel in a country like Nigeria. I think one of the things I've learned, and I've had to learn, is His grace for me. I put a lot of pressure on myself. I think maybe being somewhat of a performer, and in many ways, I think over the years, I've had to try to separate that in somewhat from my Christian, walk and my walk with Jesus, is that He's not asking me to perform. He loves me the way I am. Sometimes I say those words, even on 100 Huntley Street, God loves you the way you are. And then I have to look at myself, but do I believe that? And I've come to the conclusion, yes, He loves me just as I am, whether I'm a host on 100 Huntley Street, traveling the world with a Persecuted Church, being at home with my family, which is very important to me. But the pressure that I would put on myself, I think I've been able to understand and really get an understanding of His grace. And I think the thing that I've really learned is His love is unconditional.
God's been working in Greg's life in the past few years in just teaching him how to rest. That 0 to 60 has been constant, which is a good thing, but also it's caused him to be weary as well. What I've seen in the result of those changes, the changes of rest, is that Greg has become a better husband and a better father. It's a wonderful thing to see, just a man that is much more at peace than he's ever been in his whole life.
I had a situation recently. It was unprompted, by my youngest daughter, Amelia. I have 4 children. She's the youngest of the 4. And, we'd been talking about God. And in our home, we've really tried to be natural in our relationship with God. And so Amelia, one time, I'm just sitting on the couch, and she comes over to me, and she's just such a sweet kid. And she gives me a hug, and she says, Daddy, thank you for showing me God. And I thought, this kid knows all the brokenness. She's seen me when I've not been always at my best. But I thought, if she thinks that and she knows everything about me, I'm going, wow, that is amazing. To me, that's success. I believe God has sustained our marriage because both Arlene and I are committed in our relationship with Jesus. There's times, probably more from her side than from my side, that like, hey, I don't know if I need this. But that's what kept us together. we were committed to Jesus when we made those wedding vows, back more than 30 years ago. We meant them. So what are we making here?
Coconut rice. And chicken.
Sometimes you feel like you're just hanging on by a thread in your marriage, and yet that thread was the Lord, and He was drawing us in. And I think for me, I had to get to that part where I was broken and that I could lose my marriage. I remember at that point, I said, you know what? I don't have a ministry. I don't have anything if I can't get this together in my marriage. And it was after that I sought out marriage counseling, received healing, and almost immediately there was change. The best years of our marriage have been our recent years, and I think that has been also an example to our kids.
I think what we've learned in our marriage that has sustained us is forgiveness. Okay, cut the broccoli just into bite-sized pieces that you put in the pan, not in your mouth. And to agree to disagree at times. It's very difficult to always agree on everything, and we've really discovered that it is okay.
Sometimes it's going to get rough, absolutely. There will be good points, but there'll be some dark times. And if your commitment with the Lord is strong and you say, I will not give up on this because this is what God has called us to do, to live together until one of us, passes on. Life goes so fast. It feels like the birthdays are coming quicker. Those main birthdays, those every 10-year birthdays seem to be coming quicker and quicker. Getting older, and I think as I don't think I can't quite see the finish line yet, but I'm getting closer to it. So that's what really drives me, is to see people come into a relationship with Jesus, see them discipled, see them transformed, so they too would have that same desire to reach people with this amazing message that God has given us. I want to go through that finish line. I might be 100 years old when it happens, but I want to finish well, and I want to go blazing through to the end.